to these lectures after they're done each week so that you can go into Canvas and you can just easily click on the link. Okay, let me make sure my volume on this is off though. Okay, we're good. All right. All right, let's get started. All right. Okay, so again, what we're doing is we're doing a building process. So we're going to start with overarching ideas of what creates a human condition for which someone goes and seeks help for, and then how that explanation is used then to help that individual heal or get through whatever it is that is affecting them. In this class, just so you know, many of the examples will come out of the addiction field, but also out of the trauma field. My main area of expertise when I did clinical work was in the field of relationship violence, trauma, sexual abuse, child abuse, all of those areas. So a lot of the examples that will be used will come from that area. But when I say whatever else someone, this can include things like depression, anxiety, and other disorders. So I just want to just state that as interchangeable things. So, what is helping? Well, first of all, we need to understand that helping is a group process. I know in this class that we kind of separate the idea of individual therapy from group therapy. But whenever you have more than one person in a dialogue, you're in a group. Okay. And one of the common misconceptions is a lot of people go, well, it's not a group because one person is the professional and one person is the person seeking help. So there's that disconnect between, so that's not really a group because they're not both at the same level, same page, blah, blah, blah. But as we will see through this class, is that the facilitator is as much as the quote unquote expert professional as they are a participant in the helping process. So whenever we're helping, and I want you to kind of get this mindset, whenever we're helping, the expert is still an active participant experiencing the world that the individuals who are coming to them are. So they are a group. Okay. And so going on from there, I do want to tell a story. Some of you know, I know Harold is in the class and whatnot. I come from the Northwest, mainly Idaho, Wyoming, Montana, Oregon, a little bit of Utah, not much. So, when here in Tucson and here on the Tohono Nation, when we want to get away from experience, maybe we go to Rocky Point or up Mount Lemmon or something like that. That was kind of our weekend getaways sometimes, right? While up where I live, the place that you go for just to get away from the week is you go to Yellowstone National Park. Okay. Now, this is a very old picture. This is my ex-father-in-law, but I want to talk about him for a minute because he was kind of the leader of the group. And when he went to Yellowstone Park, the thing that he wanted to really explore was not the beautiful nature out there and whatnot. He was hell bent on wanting to find a grizzly bear and see grizzlies and bears and whatnot. I never understand that because this looking at birds seems a lot cuter than looking at a bear, but bird, bear, but he wanted to see a bear. So, anyways, uh, in the national park, though, if you want to see one of these guys or girls, you tended to have to go off on what's called the a beaten path, right? And in Yellowstone, at least then, when you wanted to go off and explore, they had these roads that were one way in and one way out. Okay. There was no points where you got so far and you could just turn your car around and go back. Okay. It's literally make sure you have enough gas and everything to get through this length of road. Okay. So we were in one early spring. We had a really heavy snow that year, but we had a rapid thaw. So the soil was really, really loose and everything. And we were driving down one, this isn't the road, it's just an example. We were driving down one of these roads and a microburst hit. And that microburst knocked a tree across the road. Okay. So we come up to this chain of cars. There was probably 8, 10 cars in front of us, and me and my ex-father-in-law, we got out and we walked up to this tree, and there were some very intelligent people surrounding this tree talking about what are they going to do? How are they going to move? How are we going to move this tree so we can all get by? Okay. And if I remember right, there was like a construction worker, a teacher, I believe there was an engineer. I mean, these were, people, adults with varied skills and whatnot. And on top of the tree, they even had tools. They had an axe, a hammer, car jack. They had a rope. One thing that I've never added to this slide is I remember there was a blanket too. I don't know if they were just trying to put the tree to sleep or whatnot, but there was a blanket on top, and they were looking at their tools. They were looking at this tree, trying to figure out how it is that they can move this tree. And so um, here we are, stuck. Here we are, we were stuck. And all of a sudden, though, we noticed that the tree lifted a little. Okay. And if you know anything about pine trees, is they're really heavy at the bottom and they get lighter as it goes towards the top. Okay. But here, this tree, it keeps going up and down slightly, slightly, and a little more each time. And it's like everyone at the same time looked up the tree towards what would have been the top of the tree. And there was this, maybe 8, 9, max 11-year-old boy just lifting the very tip of the tree up. Okay. And all of a sudden, there was like this light bulb moment that they went, well, if that young boy could lift just that little part of the tree, us together can lift it and push it over the other side of the road. Okay. And that's exactly what they did. They got together as a group and they moved that tree, and we got out of that area just fine. Okay. There's some things about this story that I want to emphasize because it's really stuck with me over the years. Is one, the idea of functional fixedness. Okay. When we approached those very intelligent, very thoughtful individuals with all those tools, they didn't know how to solve the problem because their traditional knowledge, the traditional tools that they had, prevented them from seeing a solution to the problem. Okay. And that's a very common issue that you will see in group treatment is is individuals who are at the most despaired point of their life, and they can be very intelligent, beautiful people with varying skills. I've treated anyone from a someone with a third grade education clear up to doctors and people with doctorate degrees, but they come in with the same kind of can't understand why I keep falling into this situation or experiencing this experience. Okay. The second point of this story is that that little boy did not fix the problem. He couldn't lift the tree all on his own. He couldn't do it by himself. He just provided a catalyst for people to understand how they can go about solving a problem. And for me, that little boy represents what we do as therapists, counselors, social workers, group therapists, is we are catalysts to say, hey, what about this? What if we did this instead of that? And only providing that hint. And then through the group process, hopefully seeing those light bulbs go, oh, I can apply that to my life, or I can apply this to this. Oh, hey, that's how I could solve that problem. Okay. We don't tell the complete answer. Okay. Because each individual is different and will have their own unique way of applying our hints and our kind of what you would say innuendos. Okay. And that is the true skill of a master therapist is they don't tell you what to do. They just lift kind of that area of the tree to allow a person to go, ah, that's what I need to do. Okay. So I hope you can use this story. You probably can adapt this to experiences in your life. And I hope you do to remember that this is what we're here to do. Okay. So let's talk first about formalized treatment. Now, many of you have had classes with me, and I've spoken about this person all the time. I'm really getting tired of it, but it's always important to start with the roots of things. Um, so what we're going to talk about is some very broad theories of why people have the conditions they have and what is it that it's our job or what they felt was their job. We're then going to use those broad th theories then to explain different techniques like cognitive behavioral therapy, didactic therapy, and what are those based on the theories that we talked about. And then we're going to reduce it down again to different basic helping skills. So that's the goal we have. So, but if we're going to start with kind of modern clinical therapy, okay, especially, and I hate to say this, it's mostly dominated by Western thought, okay? It's changing, and we will see that through this class, but it's been dominated. The professionalization of treatment and therapy is very Western, okay? And anyone working, for example, in the Native American communities know this well because Western therapies have been tried to say this is how you have to fix your situation. But we'll get into more of the complicated parts later in the course or later on, and how these things need to be adapted to more culturally responsive treatment. But for now, I want to talk about why is it that many people feel they need to go to a professional in order to fix themselves? Or why is it when someone in our life is having difficulty, we're apprehensive about helping them and say, you probably should go see a professional? Okay. Well, it's going to start with one of our first kind of professional people who are going to apply what's called the talking cure to helping people. Okay. And it's going to start with a person named Sigmund Freud. Now, don't me, but just kind of go with this train of thought. If you want, if you're going into therapy or treatment, and that's the area you really are interested in, I would encourage you to explore Sigmund Freud and psychodynamics and neo-Freudians, people who wrote after him, and his theory. Okay. because the idea of professional counseling starts with Sigmund Freud. Okay. At least in the, you bring your insurance card and you pay someone to help you. Okay. So let me first explain who Sigmund Freud is. He probably doesn't need much of an introduction, but Sigmund Freud was first and foremost a neurologist. Okay, he was born in Leipzig, Germany, I believe. And he was a born in a Jewish family. He himself was Jewish and had many, many children. But he went into academia wanting to be a serious scientist. He wanted to be someone who studied neurology. Okay. In fact, his doctoral dissertation, I believe, was on the something like the nervous system of a frog or some amphibian like that. Um, and he really wanted to be a therapist, okay? Not a therapist, a scientist. But at the time, there was no scientific society or scientific university that would hire him because he was Jewish. In the Europeans at that time, there was a lot of anti-Semitism, excuse my slurring on that one, and so he was rejected. So his only choice was to go in the medical field, and because he was trained as a neurologist, he went and became a psychiatrist. Okay, dealing with many of the ailments that most neurologists and psychiatrists deal with today, such as not being able to feeling an arm when an arm's not there, or explaining different pains where there's no physical cause for them, clear to mental disorders. And at the time, one of the main mental disorders that was being treated was a disorder called hysteria, okay, or his histrionic disorder was the kind of more technical term for it. And what is histrionic or hysteria disorder? Well, the etiology of it is someone who has emotional outbursts, inappropriate emotional outbursts, outbursts of anger, outbursts of, and then maybe combined with extreme sadness and crying and anger, those kinds of things, and they were intermittent and whatnot. And the people who were most commonly referred for his hysteria were women. Okay. Now, to kind of explain this in a historical way, at this time, both in the United States and in Europe, where Freud was, in order for a woman to get medical treatment, they needed permission of their father or their husband. Okay. And if you could imagine, the wife gets a little uh, out of control. What's the husband gonna do? He's gonna take her to the doctor and say she's out of control, right? And she needs treatment. So the disorder is called hysteria because the root is hysta. And the root in hysta in Greek is female sexual organs. Okay, so if you think about the medical procedure of a hysterectomy, it's the removal of the female sex organs. Okay, and so hysteria was believed that the woman's womb was wandering around the individual's body and creating havoc and these emotional outbursts and all those kinds of things. That's where the term that person is being hysterical. That's or 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 they are experiencing hysteria. That term is where that origin came from. Okay, so that was the main disorder that Freud and a partner of his called Dr. Brunner were really looking at. Okay, so to long story short, Freud was consulting with Brunner at the time on a famous case of Anna O. Okay. And this person one time went to Dr. Bruner and said, Dr. Bruner, I'm telling all my friends to come see you. And he's like, why? The only thing we've done since you've come here is you come and we talk, and that's it. We haven't done any physical or biological type of treatment. And she goes, well, I think that's the magic that you are. She said, this is probably a fairy tale part of this story. But she said, the thing is me coming here every 4, 5, 6 weeks and talking. When I leave here, I'm alleviated from my symptoms, and I'm alleviated them for several weeks. And then I start to feel them come back. I come back and talk to you, and then they go away again. And Freud and Bruner after that kind of came and talked, and they're like, well, maybe we're on to something. Okay. So they developed what is called the talking cure. Okay. The talking cure is then going to develop into modern day psychotherapy and counseling. Okay. So the roots of modern counseling and psychotherapy come from this experience of Sigmund Freud and Bruner. And yes, there's a lot of other developing things at the time. I don't want you to think that these guys are the only ones exploring this, but they're really kind of the root of it. Okay. However, what was baffling to Dr. Freud was how is it that someone comes to me or Dr. Bruner, my colleague, and they can talk and we talk back, and provide them with some of our advice, and then they go feel better. And he came to the conclusion that it must be because I am hearing something about their story based on my training that they don't have access to, that they don't understand. Okay. And so, based on this, Freud is going to come up with a theory of the unconscious mind. Okay. He's going to state that the reason why a person has to come to someone like me who is trained in what he's going to develop into psychoanalytics is because I am a trained expert and I can access things about you that you don't have access to. Okay. Now, one could argue that this was just a really good marketing tool. That, hey, here's this person. If you have something wrong, he can tell because he's trained and all this. And yes, his business thrived based on that marketing tool. But the other, and so if you think about this uh, influence it's had on our modern time, that when someone is experiencing a mental breakdown or the guise of addiction, we need to send them to professionals because they have some understanding that we don't. This comes from the ideas of Sigmund Freud. Okay, and it's stuck with our culture up through to today. Okay. But beyond that, he's going to develop a theory of uh, um, mental life that is based on unconscious processes. Um, no worries, Kara. We're glad you made it. Okay. And what he's going to do, but because he was a neurologist and he wanted his theory to be scientifically based, he wanted to note that the unconscious, what drives us to do what we do, has to be based on biological drives. There has to be something that drives all of us to do what we do. And so he's going to come up with two things. The basics of them are listed at the bottom of this slide, but it's going to start with some Greek words. One is Thantos. Some of you might remember the Thantos of the Marvels, the guy that snapped his fingers and eliminated half of the world, and Eros. Okay. Thanatos is represents death. Okay. Eros represents life. Okay. And so in the Greek mythologies and whatnot, Eros went and he was the one who, if you want to think about it, he was the little flying dude that shoots the arrows that makes people fall in love. And he was more about love and creation and all those. Thanatos was death and destruction. But those are broad concepts. They're not things that we do based on biology. Okay. So he reduced Thanatos down to what he called our aggression instinct. We have a natural aggressive instinct to one, protect what is ours and to die. Well, everyone's going to die someday. And that is our aggression instinct. We're aiming towards death. So we need to physically and aggressively protect what we have here in our life. And then he's going to reduce Eros down to our sex instinct, that what we're here to do is reproduce and make more humans, okay, based on evolutionary type theory ideas. Okay. So our two basic drives are sex and aggression. Okay. And in this model, um, Freud is going to use the kind of common representation of Freud's theory is an iceberg type of idea. Okay. Icebergs, about 10% of an iceberg is above the water. Okay. And this, according to Freud, represents our consciousness. This is what we experience. This is what we are aware of. Okay. 90% of our what drives us to do what we do are in the unconscious mind. Okay. It exists below the level of awareness. Okay. So the majority of what we do is driven by um, these different concepts. Okay. He placed sex and aggression in the id. Okay. This is, if you translate id from German, it translates to it, but it has a deeper meaning. It means this is the place, this is the location, this is where the seat of the mind is. And it is what houses our aggressive and sexual instincts. And what it wants to do is it operates on what's known as the pleasure principle. It seeks out to satisfy those two basic needs, okay, and drives. However, if you could imagine if as species we went around just trying to have sex with each other and beat each other up, we probably would have not existed as a species for very long. Okay. So according to Freud, the id developed what's known as the ego. Okay. The ego is the only part of the unconscious mind that has access to the external world and an awareness of what the id is trying to do. So the ego operates on what's called the realistic principle. Okay. Meaning that it's looking at the world and going, we can't beat up everyone and we can't just have sex with everyone. There's ways that we have to go about this to make it so we survive, we work together, we develop a life together, all of these different things. Okay. Now, to aid the ego in especially these very primitive drives, the id and the ego developed what's known as a superego. Okay. The superego operates on the idealistic principle, meaning that what we need to do is make sure that we follow all the rules, we act proper and appropriate in every situation. We are we need to be civilized people. Okay. If you kind of hear that term, you're hearing a little bit of colonialism in this term, because this is what one of the reasons why justifications theoretically that people who are not of Western civilization, they don't have a strong superego. I'm just using this because Freud's theories was used to justify prejudices. But with that being said, this is kind of that thing that tells us this is how we're supposed to act in every situation. And it's supposed to be a counterweight to these primitive aggressive drives and sexual drives. Okay. So that's the basic operation under Freud. I will tell you, Neo-Freudians tended to de-emphasize sexuality. Some emphasize the drive for superiority, some for control, those kinds of things, and they tended to de-emphasize sexual. So in a lot of psychoanalytics, you'll focus on different areas, but this is the original theory. Okay. So what does this look like in practice? And we won't go through, we went through all these. By the way, the idea of having an angel and a devil on your shoulder, this is another cultural thing that Freud provided. If you look before Freud, there wasn't these two people vying for your soul and whatnot. This was actually came out of the Freudian era. In fact, if you look at a lot of Christian writing before Freudian theory, it never mentioned many of these conflicts between good and evil, and in your mind you have an angel and you have a devil. This is very much a Freudian idea that you have your id and your superego trying to tell you this is how you should act. So a little cultural notation about Freud's influence. Okay, we can skip all these. You can go through these slides. It's also in the book, but we kind of went over it with the this. So this is kind of the model, right? We have id, the pleasure principle. We have the superego, the idealistic, and then we have the ego. We can think of the ego as the executor, the executive branch of the system. It's getting information from reality, id, superego, and then this produces our behavioral and emotional responses. Okay. And so this is just kind of a very simple example of how these interplay with each other. So if we have an oversized ego, oversized id, average sized ego, and a smaller superego, according to Freud, we were pleasure seekers. These are people who seek high risk situations. These are individuals who probably partake of stimulant type drugs, such as methamphetamine or cocaine. These are people who are constantly looking for that next pleasure. Okay. Um, a person who has an oversized superego, a lower id, and again, about an average sized ego, tend to be guilt ridden because they don't ever feel like that they're acting as if they should be. They're always feeling that they're not superior to everyone else. They're always doing something wrong. Okay. According to Freud, a healthy person actually has an oversized ego and an equal size id and an equal size superego to satisfy, so the ego can then be able to process the information and fairly satisfy the needs of the id and the superego. Okay, so this is kind of a graph, a very simple graph of how these different parts of the unconscious mind might interact. Okay. Let's go. Okay. Now, the other part about Freud's theory that isn't on these slides is Freud also was one of the first that kind of stated that early childhood experiences matter. He believed that all dysfunction within the unconscious was a dysfunction out of development in early childhood and the child's interaction with the world, specifically their primary caregiver, at that time, the mother. And that if there was dysfunction in that relationship, and experiences of dysfunction in that very early period of child development. This is then what created things like histrionic disorder or depression or anxiety and those kinds of things. Okay. So his focus on early childhood is one of the, if we want to think about stereotypes about therapy, psychoanalysts still do this. The stereotype about therapy is that you want to regress the person and explore every aspect of their lived experience, and you want to take them clear back into their experiences in early childhood and understand the development of their disorder as it was developing through their early childhood experience, and to explore all of these things. And only then, once we understand those dynamics, we can understand the person's disorder. Okay. So that idea of having to know about childhood and all those things comes from Freudian theory. And when we look at a lot of the problems that we see individuals go through, he was probably partially right. If anyone knows about the ACEs study, which is Adverse Childhood Experience Study, they have found that indeed, the more trauma a child experiences, especially at a younger and younger age, the more dysfunction we see in adult life. Okay. However, one of the arguments is do you resolve that childhood issue, or do you work with a person right here, right now? And we'll get into that debate a little bit later in the class as we talk about different types of therapies. Okay. So I just want to check in. You could put yes or no in the chat, um, uh, or you can put a question. Is everybody okay to this point? Is there any questions about this first theory before I go on to this very important part of Freudian theory? Put a yes or a no or a question in the chat and let me know how everyone's doing. Okay. All right. So I'm assuming we're doing good so far. Okay. If there is any questions, please put it in the chat, or you can unmute yourself if you're comfortable being recorded. But I think we're okay to go on. So one of parts of Freud's legacy was his daughter Anna Freud. Um, if you again, if you want to read kind of the early therapists' experiences of helping people. She's a good person to refer to. She wrote a few books. They're very interesting because they really are kind of within the treatment of human beings and in the therapeutic process. She really is kind of, if you want to call her, the grandma of feminist therapy and treatment. So, very interesting young lady. Most people who study Freudian theory think that defense mechanisms, which are methods we use to protect our ego from any type of damage, started with Sigmund Freud, but they actually didn't. These actually started with his daughter, Anna Freud. And then Freud basically gave his stamp of approval on it. It's just a little bit of a historical note. But she came up with, and then he added, I guess, a little bit to it, something known as defense mechanisms. Okay. Now, this is one area of treatment that we still understand and use today. Okay. Today, defense mechanisms can also be called, if you've ever heard the word thinking errors. There's psychological barriers. I've heard them called that. They use different terms, but they basically come from this notion of defense mechanisms. In original Freudian terms, these were ways of protecting the ego from any type of damage or assault. Okay. In more modern terms, we're going to say that when you see these in the group process or in the therapy process, these are red flags for you to go, we need to take a different approach. We need to try something different. Okay. So I want you to take note of these. And if you are in the field, I would encourage you to really look at these and really explore them. But I'm just noticing that we are at 11:03. So I'm thinking that we should take a quick break. Is 5 minutes okay with everybody just to take a break, take a breather? If we came back at 11, how about we say we come back at 11:10 and we'll wrap up with these defense mechanisms because they are important. So let's come back at 11:10 and we will continue. We'll see you guys in a few minutes. You don't need